fundamentals and parts and basics, and kind of take people through the signal flow of the microphone,
Mm.
and then end with some obviously with Q&A. So I think you said about 15 minutes. It shouldn't be longer than that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you go to 20, I mean, there's only two of you guys, right?
Yeah.
So just please don't feel,
Okay.
that kind of pressure to, fit
And,
under
and
15.
and let me tell you this, just to hip Robert to this ahead of time. The presentation I'm doing is at Byron's request, is about the Shure SM57 that's used at the White House for 55 years. I was actually the liaison to the White House for 25 of those years, so I saw the inside of it. But one of the things is that I will talk about the advantages of a dynamic microphone over a condenser microphone for that specific application. It is not denigrating condenser microphones, because we make them as well, and I know you do as well. So take no offense to that.
Oh, no, no, no.
It just happens that for the president's situation, the dynamic is just a better choice. So,
Absolutely.
yep.
Let me turn the AC off, the forced air here.
Yeah, and if my connection gets kind of choppy,
sorry.
let me know too,
Okay.
guys.
I do not mean to cut you off. I just wanted to let everyone know we are broadcasting on Facebook 15 minutes early, just so that you know
Okay.
that you say is live currently starting now.
So behave is what you're saying.
I just wouldn't want you to share anything about anything, in particular if you didn't want
Understood.
to. Yeah.
I'll be interested in hearing, Robert, about if you talk about building your condensers and so forth, and if you got a sputtering machine to make the diaphragms and so forth.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately. I
Yeah.
do buy them.
Yeah, okay, I can appreciate that.
Small setup here.
Yeah. Are those? I see some behind you. Are those yours?
One of them's mine, and one of them's not. One of them's a vintage U47, and one of them is a new prototype of one I just have been working on for the past couple months during quarantine.
How much do good performing U47s go for now?
In good condition?
Yeah.
I've seen them go for 15, 16.
No, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's astonishing.
I know.
Amazing.
Go for 8. So kind of all over the place.
One of the things we have that's is interesting is actually I didn't start out as a historian. I basically evolved into it. This is like my 5th and final career at Shure, because I've been there for 44 years. But we have an archive there where we have one of at least every product that we've made since 1932. So, and interesting how many of them still work. The condensers from the 30s do not, primarily because the capacitors have dried out and so forth. But the dynamics, interestingly enough, some of the crystal microphones from the 30s still work. And was I shocked when I first heard a good performing crystal microphone? They sound really good.
I think I'm missing some of the crystal microphone.
Yeah, so there's an element called a substance called the Rochelle salt. It's like a salt crystal. It's related to table salt, but actually first developed in the late 1600s for, of all things, a laxative. And in the early part of the 20th century, someone, and I've never quite figured out who, figured out that if you grew a Rochelle salt crystal and then sliced off a really thin sliver of it, held one end down, and then flexed the other end of it, you basically create an electrical signal.
Really?
Yeah. And it's just an astonishing technology. And the actual sliver of salt really isn't, take your fingernail on your little tiny pinky finger, about half the size of that. And the output level is really substantial. It's very high impedance, of course, but man, they sound amazing. I mean, when I first found the crystal in the archive that hooked up, I kind of had a vision of like a scratchy sounding 78 record with no low end.
Yeah.
Nope. Don't sound like that at all.
Real salty sound.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, or tasteful, however you want to look at it, right?
Yeah, so I actually have all the ingredients in my basement. I intend to grow a crystal one of these days when but they don't all turn out to have the electrical characteristics. There was a company in Cleveland called the Brush Development Company that had all the patents and all the technology. So the crystal mics that were made in the United States in the 30s and 40s and 50s all bought their crystals from Brush, much like Robert buys his diaphragms from someone else too. So Shure did that too. You open up a Shure crystal microphone, and it always says in there, manufactured under a license from Brush Development Company.
I guess, man, I got so many questions. Oh my God, I got so many questions.
Yeah.
That is the, and well, this is kind of off the record, I guess. If I don't know if we're still broadcasting or not, but the 57, I know it changed. I think did that change from the 70s?
No, the microphones are essentially the same. Now we've made improvements. We've changed materials. We've changed adhesives. Where we used to use an adhesive, maybe do a laser weld now. But the basic concept, the basic functional concept of it is the same.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna save my questions, man.
Okay.
I could keep going. Both of y'all gonna receive it.
I'm just the moderator. I'm fascinated.
Well, good. Glad that it's fun to make history interesting. And sometimes you actually have to be in your later part of your career to be able to go back and see all the pieces of the puzzle laying on the table and go, oh, I see how this goes together now. I couldn't have done that when I was younger.
Yeah.
Because you just learn all this stuff and it comes together.
Because Aliki and I, we were talking about tube mics, and she said, "Oh, that's the thing that looked like, like a." At first, she said, "Oh, this is a tube mic, a picture of a tube mic," and I was like, "Well, why do you say that?" And she said, "Well, it looks like a tube. It's tubular shaped."
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what
I was like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a tube mic. And she said, "Well, what makes it a tube mic?" I said, "Well, we're gonna find out tomorrow." But we were talking about the actual power supply. And so she was like, "Oh, that reminds me of the Ghostbusters movie."
Yeah. Well, when you get into that, if you get back to me, I can tell you about tube microphones that Shure had at one time. We no longer do, but
really,
yeah.
You guys used to make tube mics, huh?
30s, we had condenser tube microphones. Probably the most interesting one, Robert, was something I did not know about, and it was less than a year ago, maybe over a year ago, where a local guy who had retired sent me a prototype of a Shure microphone that had a tube called a New Vister. You ever heard of the New Vister?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was an effort.
Little tiny metal tube.
Exactly, it was an effort by the tube manufacturers to fight off the transistor, which was taking over. And so in the early 1960s, we made a couple prototypes of a condenser mic that had a New Vister in it instead of transistors in it. So it would officially have been a vacuum tube microphone. Never went anywhere. The one example I know of we've got, it doesn't work, but it was something. And the primary reason we didn't go after that is that in the 60s and the 70s, we were making so much money off of phonograph cartridges that microphones were secondary.
1925 was when y'all started, right?
Right, but we didn't start manufacturing our own microphones until 1932.
Exactly. That's what I was getting ready to go with that. Yeah, I was wondering because I wanted to ask that question.
Yep.
In there too as well,
we were a distributor of products from 1925 to 1932.
Like what products were they?
Primarily radio kits that you would actually assemble your own AM radio.
Yeah.
But then in the late 20s and the early 30s, when the Depression came along, if you look at the Shure catalog, there were radio kits, there were pre-made radio kits, there were baseball gloves, there were coffee pots. They were selling everything they could just to stay in business.
Did they start out of Chicago?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Always, yes. 1925 in Chicago. 1956 we moved to Evanston because we built a plant there, which is just north of Chicago. And then 2004 our headquarters went to Niles, which is again another suburb of Chicago, but always been in Chicago.
So it's an Illinois company. I never knew that.
Yeah.
And that's what I perform with live. Whenever I'm live,
who doesn't?
Yeah, like I had no clue it's Illinois. Wow.
Yep. Always been in there. Mr. Scher was born in Chicago in 1903.
Contemporary of my
Wow.
great grandmother's. That's cool.
What time you got to like it?
5 minutes to four. No, 3 minutes to. So I
Yep.
got.
3 minutes too.
So whenever.
Yeah, I would send Zoom at about 2 minutes too.
Cool. Well, I'm really interested in hearing Robert talk because I'm vacuum tube microphones have always interested me. I've never owned one, I mean, well, except for the ones in the archives. But I'll be interested in, why you got into it and the whole mystique behind it.
Let me ask you
That,
this, Robert.
that's a loaded
um,
question.
um, hey Robert, so what do you
Yeah.
think about the WA 251?
The warm, is that the warm product?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about their line of products. I know they got a whole bunch,
yeah,
not just mics, right? They got preamps and
yeah,
compressors and
yeah.
all kinds of stuff. I've never had it in my shop, so I really can't comment
Mm,
too much on. Some guys I talked to haven't really given it great reviews.
mm.
But some people have. I mean, I read a lot, and a lot of people like it. So
Yeah, yeah.
And
depends.
broadcasting starting now.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, we'll let that propagate. As are we still on Facebook?
Yes, we're live.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna just go ahead and get started then. I'm gonna give Zoom a few more seconds
Sure.
to get propagated, and then we will jump down this rabbit hole that everyone loves so much. Yeah, man. Thanks again, guys, for coming and doing this. This is great. It's
Yeah.
great.
Long commute. I had to walk up from the first floor to the second floor, Byron. So,
I had to let go of the refrigerator handle to get here. So, yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. Oh, okay, Byron. That's not necessary. There we go. Yeah. All right. Likey.
Yes.
I think we about ready. I mean, hey, what is this? This is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Maybe 13, 14, 14.
We're in
Maybe.
the teens. Yep.
We're in the teens. We're in the teens. You always say, oh, you started without me. You ain't say that
Could be
today.
more. He could be. I'm gonna sit down and count. Okay, that's my homework for next week.
Got you. Hey everybody, hey, thanks once again for showing up. And I know in the Facebook land we was broadcasting a little early, but it's cool. At least you get to again see a little bit of the background, what's happening before things start to take off. Um Welcome to IC Music, where we train the totally blind and visually impaired in audio production and studio engineering as it pertains to adaptive technology. I'm going to mention our sponsors, Avid, makers of Pro Tools. Man, the world's leading software, audio technology software. Pro Tools is amazing. I use it. Everyone uses it who's blind. That's not true, but they should, right? Yeah, I know they should. Also, Sweetwater, another great supporter of IC Music. Yes. Sweetwater, the world's largest pro audio retailer. Call them up, get your gear, email them, get your gear to be on your doorstep. Whenever you want it to. Pretty much. I order stuff, it gets here, like I said before, in about 6 hours. Maybe tack on another 12 hours, and you'll probably get more of a realistic time. Also, Native Instruments, the makers of the all accessible Complete Control and Machine. Yeah, Machine. That's a great piece. Industry standard sounds. Also, Shure Microphone.
I've heard of them.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, Shure Microphone. Oh my God, providing us with the internal workings of microphones, condensers, ribbons, and dynamics. So our face-to-face learners can get a really good idea of how things are laid out as it pertains to microphones. Oddly enough, today this is a this is a this is a very special one. I say that every week, but this is truly a special one. We have Mr. Robert Sestili from RMS Audio Works in Detroit. It is in Detroit, right, Robert?
Detroit Metro. Yeah, right outside.
Detroit. Okay. Not proper. Just Detroit Metro. Okay, got you, brother. Got you. Thanks for being here today, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
From Sure, from Sure the corporation, the actual corporation Sure. Oh my God, this is a historian out of this world. We talked a little bit on Monday, and I was just like I was on my way to a training, and he was making me late because I was just like asking questions back to back to back to back, and I was like I need to save some of this stuff. Michael Patterson, thank you.
Byron. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's have some fun. I'm sure we'll have some and good questions. I'm certain between Robert and myself and you, it should be a good time.
Oh well, we're gonna have some fun today. Yeah. I think the presentation, the White House and Shure microphone, just trying to see what that conversation, that relationship is about.
Mm-hmm.
We'll dig into that a little bit later, but
Okay.
quickly, I said that Shure provides us internal working for microphones, but so did RMS. RMS also. Back in 2013 or 14, I think it was, Robert. You gave us some pieces,
Spare parts, yeah.
the spare parts for
Yeah.
like a tube and all these different things, as it pertains to tube mics, which is your specialty, correct?
That's correct.
So let me ask this. So RMS, when did it get started? First of all, tell them a little bit. Just give them a little bit about the company. First of all, that's the first things first.
Sure, yeah. So officially, 2010 was when I officially opened the business. So about a decade now. We were doing a lot of work before that unofficially. We started out of Chicago, small condo out of Chicago. And when we moved to Michigan about 5 years ago, and since kind of expanded a little bit since then, obviously more space. But yeah, we got into repairing and restoring old mics, vintage mics, even some modern ones as well. We would do some repairs on various studios in the area, and I met a lot of cool people in Chicago. That's how Byron. One producer there in Chicago.
Yep.
And then I, officially opened a business in 2010 and started launching with one mic, or a reproduction of a vintage mic called the C12 from AKG. And then after that, more and more models came down the line and started filling up our time. And then, we always kept the restoration and restore and repair service around. So that's, believe it or not, that's about 50% of our business.
I can believe that. Yeah, I can see that. Just real quick, the reason I think that this particular webinar is going to be special or is special is because the microphone seems to be probably in audio the most popular conversation, the most popular topic. I think people see them, people are enthralled with them. It's this cool thing. You can pick it up, you can hold it, you can put it on the stand, you're singing into it, performing into it, talking into it, whatever. And it's almost like a person, right? Because it's like kind of the window to the world, especially if you're a creative. And I think what's special even more is that you gentlemen have clear, or should I say, extensive knowledge on how that window is really constructed. Let me ask this: what made you even want to, Robert? What gave you What was your inspiration? What inspired you to start creating? Even, I mean, the C12, that's a monster. What inspired that?
Well, like I said, I think it's a loaded question, but
It is.
the main thing us when I started the business is when you see one of those old vintage microphones up on the stand, like the U47 behind me, and you talk into that thing, it's magic. It is
Mm,
a gorgeous sounding microphone. Anyone who's recorded with one of those old vintage microphones knows what I'm talking about.
yeah,
So at a young age, which I was 10 years ago, uh, no one, these things are going for a lot of money these days now. We couldn't afford things like that. So little by little, you start repairing and modding microphones and, kind of building up your talent and skills.
yeah,
And that's really what it was about. It was like you mentioned, it was kind of like the hype of those vintage microphones, and
yeah,
just hearing that tone in your headphones was, you know, something that was it's hard to reproduce these days
yeah,
with
yeah.
mod with modern.
Yeah. You kind of getting robotic on us there. You still there? Oh, okay. Well,
I'm
maybe
here.
not. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
You guys still
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah. Got you. We lost a little bit of the
Oh,
probably last 3 or 4 sentences you said.
yeah. So if sorry if you guys missed that, but yeah, that was really it for us, was just
What's that?
trying to
Can you?
reproduce those sounds and those microphones of the past. So it's,
Nice. Nice, nice, nice. Very, very much so. Yeah. So and so, Michael.
Yes.
Sure. I mean, man, how long have you been with the company?
October of this year, a couple of months, I will be there for 44 years. And by the way, let me just give you an idea of that. You would think that I would be like number one or number two on seniority with 44 years. I'm only number 8 with
are
44 years.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
So this means that this is a good company to work for, then.
It's a great, it's a great company to work for. Sometimes you land on the greener side of the fence and you just stay there, and that's what I decided to do.
When did Shore kick off? When was this a thing, and who started it? Why?
1925 was when a 23-year-old SN Shure, Sidney Natkin Shure, but he preferred SN, started a company to distribute radio parts. He was a hobbyist in the 1920s. In the 1920s, AM radio was like the computers of the 1970s. Everybody was into it. You built them and from scratch. So we thought it would be a good thing to do to have a mail order company where you could buy radio parts to build your own radios. And that's what he started out doing. 3 years later, his brother joined. We were called Shure Brothers for many years. Some people still call us Shure Brothers, but his brother joined in 1928, but left in 1930. But we kept the name for like 70 years. It was pretty weird. But we didn't actually start making our first microphone until 1932. So we were a distributor of products from 1925 to 1932, and then mid 1932, we started making our own microphones, and that's when we became a manufacturer.
Mm-hmm. So mail order.
Mail order, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Chicago was the hub of mail order, right? Sears Roebuck was here. Montgomery
I
Ward
guess
was
you're
here,
right. Yes,
right?
sir.
So
Yes.
that's
Yes.
Center of the country, lots of railroads. It was a perfect place for mail order.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just talking about that the other day in economics discussion. That this was is a great place for intermodal type of centers and stuff like that.
Yep.
So Shure makes the dynamic. So that if they don't know, for those who may have been under a rock for the past, I don't know, almost 100 years now.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Shure is the maker of the SM57, the Beta 58s, and these types of microphones. They moved into other products. What type of other products do you guys have?
Currently, or over our history?
Currently now.
Currently, wired microphones. Even though wireless microphones are by far the biggest portion of our dollar amount that we sell.
Hmm.
We make wireless in-ear monitors for musicians here on stage. We make earphones, which really were aimed originally at musicians, and then people who were buying something weird called the iPod around 2004 started putting Shure headphones under that, earphones, and we make headphones as well. We also do a lot of another good portion of our business is we call it conferencing, which would be like microphones for meeting rooms. We make microphone arrays which go into ceilings and have 120 elements in there and basically create beams. A lot of different things, but I think if you really kind of narrow it down, we're a transducer manufacturer, be it at the beginning where it turns from air into electronics, or at the other end where it turns from electronic into air again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because I know we were talking about it. So the price list is over 100 pages.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So no one man at this company knows every single thing about every single product. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible. That's what we have 3 different sales divisions and so forth. And it gets a little frustrating too, because sometimes, you work at Shure. Can you tell me about this new earphone you've got, which uses Bluetooth? And I can give you a general gist of it, but I'm not an expert on it. And I have to go find always know who to talk to. That's the important thing.
That's a good position to be in.
Yeah.
So what types of mics as far as like the dynamic stuff? I know that's the 57, the beta 58s. What types of mics is Shure?
Well, right now we have 3. We have dynamic microphones, which of course have a magnet inside there, I like to call them moving coil microphones. That's probably a better description than dynamic. We have ribbon microphones, which are really a variation on a dynamic. It just turns out now that there's no voice coil, that the actual diaphragm and the voice coil, quote unquote, are the same thing. And we have condenser microphones. In the past, we made carbon, we made crystals, we made ceramics, a whole variety of things which are no longer made. But right now, ribbon, dynamic, ribbon, moving coil, and then condensers.
And then, so Robert, RMS, you guys, you're making tube and what else? Anything else?
So we only make tube microphones. We started prototyping some other products in the past, but really, I think our market area is strictly, vintage style tube microphones.
So condenser elements, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Nice. This is some amazing presentations. I know we were discussing them beforehand. I want to jump into it right now. I just want to keep asking questions just for my own, just because I want to know.
Okay.
But I think what I want to do, I want to learn about this White House relationship with the SM57.
Okay.
I'm really curious about that, if you don't mind, Michael, because I know it's been around a while. When did the SM57? When did it even come to fruition?
SM57 was introduced in 1965, and that was the same year that it was used for the first time for the President of the United States, which then was Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson. And I'm going to use a term as we go through. It's called WACA, which stands for White House Communications Agency. It's a military organization consisting of probably around 1,000 people, and they do all the audio and the video and the lighting and the photography to support the White House and everybody who works at the White House. So when you hear the term WACA, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But it was in 1965 that WACA first used the SM57 for the president, and has been the primary microphone for the president ever since. There's been various numbers of them. You'll see that when we go through the presentation, but it's been, and as I like to say, there's been more lies heard through SM57s than any other microphone in the world.
Well, I'm speechless.
Over the decades, not just now, over the decades.
Right. No, absolutely. It's fair enough. Fair. So yeah, I'm interested. I would like to. Let's do this, man. Let's
go
do
through
it.
the presentation. All right.
I think so. Yeah.
Let me share my screen here.
Okay.
There's what I want, I believe.
And I'm just letting people know, especially in the actual Zoom community, in the blind community side, Michael will be describing some of the images in these slides too, as well, in a brief manner.
So, it's a frightening thing to think that I'm actually part of Sure's legal department now. So let me start out with the legal side, and that is that there's images in there that are educational and historical purposes only. You see a president, that doesn't necessarily mean he endorses Sure or the product. So this is just an educational presentation.
Okay, right.
So we'll start out with that. But it's been 55 years since the Unidyne 3 SM57 has been at the White House. And so it's kind of fun to go through, see and talk about who used it. And then we'll talk about why they used it, because there's very specific reasons that that microphone has survived and been the choice. So let's go back to, there's the Unidyne 1, Unidyne 2, Unidyne 3. So Unidyne 1 is some people call the Fat Boy, that came out in 1939. Some people call it the Elvis microphone. It looks like a bird cage. So here's Harry Truman in 1948 holding up the famous newspaper headlines that say Dewey defeats Truman. And right there at his right elbow is a Unidyne 1. So actually the first president to use a Shure microphone was FDR. Yep. So then the Unidyne 2, which is a smaller version of the Unidyne 1, 55S, and S simply stands for small. Here's John F. Kennedy using it. If you look closely, I just love this. There's a piece of cheesecloth that's taped around the front of the microphone as a windscreen. That's how unsophisticated the audio was back there. They really didn't have anybody who was, looking over the audio for the president. It's like wherever he went, they used whatever audio was there. And they eventually figured out that probably was not a good idea.
Yeah, right.
So in 1959, a little bit before Kennedy came, Shure introduced the Unidyne 3, and that's the element that's used in the SM58 and the SM57 and so forth. And that was different than the Unidyne 1 and the Unidyne 2 because you talked into the end of it. You did not talk into the side of it. So this is called an end-fire microphone. And for a lot of different reasons, an end-fire microphone basically will give you better gain before feedback when you're using it in the PA system. So you can turn it up louder, essentially.
Yes.
That works great when you have big audiences you're trying to address. Of course, on the sideline, it also works great for rock and roll.
Yes.
So the 57 came out in 1965. The 57 is really nothing but a 545, which came out in 1959, painted a dark gray so it doesn't reflect the camera lights, and had the switch removed so that the president or someone else using it when they're on stage couldn't switch it off accidentally. So people say, oh, 545 is not the same as an SM57. Well, I beg to differ. It is. It just simply has a different finish on it and no switch. So here is a newsletter in 1965, and a Shure newsletter, an internal newsletter, had this paragraph on it. Bob Carr, manager of the Professional Products Division, reports that we now have a separate professional line of SM microphone models. SM stood for studio microphones, by the way. One of the models, the SM57, has been selected for use at all appearances of President Lyndon B. Johnson. It is installed in the White House television studio and will be used elsewhere wherever the president's own rostrum is used. So here it is, August 1965, the first announcement that Shure and the White House have a connection. So here is President Johnson. I don't know the actual date on this. I would guess it's probably 65 or 66. And he's at the White House television studio, and there's two SM57s on the desk, one to his left and one to his right. Now, microphone people know that you really shouldn't split microphones apart like that if you're going to combine the signals. But they did that because it gave them the best camera angle. Turned out they were only using one of the microphones for the live audio anyway. So it was first used in the studios, and then they started using it when he went out and did speeches. So here's President Johnson at a lectern again, still the two microphones, one left and one right. But again, the placement of this was determined by the White House photographer. He didn't consult the audio people. He says, put the microphones here because I get the best shot of them. All this silly stuff. So after Johnson comes Nixon. And you'll see in this photo, there are 4 microphones there. Why 4 microphones? I love this story. And the reason I know the story is because I worked with a guy who worked at White House Communications Agency during this time period.
Mm.
And there's always a general or somebody pretty high up that's in charge of WACA, which stands for White House Communications Agency. And the general said, if 2 mics are good, then 4 mics will be twice as good. Get me 4 microphones for the president. Yeah, this is how our government works.
That's the American way, man. Yeah.
That's right. So here's Nixon with 4 microphones. Well, eventually, cooler heads came about, and they decided that 3 microphones kind of positioned in a triangle in front of the president was a kind of a neat look. And they would have 1 mic would feed PA, 1 mic would feed the broadcasters, and 1 mic would feed recording for the archives. And they were all separate feeds, so if one went down, that wouldn't affect the other ones. So here's a picture of Mr. Nixon, and this actually happens to be, I chose this kind of on purpose. This is his resignation speech. But there he is with the triangle microphones in front of him. But notice how, if you notice, those microphones are really close together, and there's no room to put windscreens on it, which eventually became a problem because when they went outside, they wanted to have some type of wind control. Here's Jerry Ford, again, with the same triple mount. Again, they're close together. In fact, too close to put windscreens on it. So when Jimmy Carter came about, we made a different version of the triple mount, spaced them out a little bit more, and now there was room to put the A2WS windscreen. So this picture here is Jimmy Carter with 3 SM-57s in the triangle formation, and each with an A2WS windscreen. So this would have been probably outdoors in like moderate wind. There's Mr. Reagan, the next president. This is his famous tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev speech in Berlin. And he has the same setup of 3 SM-57s in a triangle, spaced apart enough where you could have the A2WS windscreens on. And here's Mr. Bush, Bush number 1. You can see it very clearly in there, the same setup, 3 SM-57s. Eventually, they just decided to use the setup spaced apart with the microphone and the windscreens all the time. They abandoned the ones without the microphones. This is, I don't remember, everybody remembers the speech. No new taxes. That was a promise he made. And of course, he did not keep that speech, or keep that promise. But the next one, which is really an infamous one, because I was there when Bush was in office. That's when I first became the liaison between Schur and White House. What that meant was when there was an issue, when the White House wanted training or whatever, they would call me. And I traveled many, many times to the White House Communications Agency headquarters. By the way, this is a little side story. It's a very intimidating place to walk into. First of all, it takes you about 6 months to get clearance to go into it. And then once you come up, there are Marines on guard with really heavy weapons with a big sign that says, "A Marine on duty has no friends." Then when you get into the building itself, you go by doors, and there are doors that will say this, and this is a direct quote: "Unauthorized entrance will be met with deadly force." It's a very, very serious place to be in. Yeah. So this is a famous incident where the Queen of England was in the Rose Garden to give a speech. Now, Bush number 1 was about 6'2", 6'3", and they always build the lecterns so that it would fit the president. The Queen is like 5'2", probably a foot shorter. And the idea of this was that when she came up to speech, there was a little stool that a staff member was supposed to put out there so she would stand on it and be at the right height. And they forgot. And in this photo, you see the Queen, and she looks like the Elephant Man, because you see her glasses, and then you see nothing but 3 SM-57s coming out where her nose and her mouth is. And the British press was furious about this. They just came out.
Imagine.
They call it the incident of the talking hat.
Really?
Yeah. So the next day after this happened, I got a frantic phone call from WACA saying, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And I said to them, "Well, next time, why don't you put the stool out just for starters?" You know? And they said, "No, we got to do something else." And I wasn't in a very good mood that day for whatever reason. And I said kind of like facetiously, "Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you just saw off the middle microphone?" You know, and guess what? That's exactly what they did.
Are you serious?
I am serious. Here is Bill Clinton, and you'll notice the middle microphone is missing because they took the triple mounts and they sawed off the middle mount. And that's how it went from 2 microphones down to 3 microphones down to 2 microphones. And what they did then is they had 1 microphone for broadcast, 1 microphone for PA, and then the other microphone was split electronically to feed broadcast and feed the recording. But that's why it went from 3 down to 2, because of the famous Queen Elizabeth incident.
Yeah.
I can't make this stuff up.
The incident of the talking hat. That's hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. Here's Bush number 2. And you'll notice, let me back up just a second. In the Clinton, and actually all the way up to Clinton, the microphones were held kind of in a rigid mount. There was a piece of metal that was made a C shape, and then some plastic inside so the microphones wouldn't be scraped. But there was no shock mounting, and there was no vibration mounting. George W. Bush tended to stammer, and he would start pounding on the podium when he couldn't think of a word. And within a couple of months of him being in office, I got this call from WACA, and they said, we got to do something. Every time he's at the lectern, he pounds on his fist when he can't think of a word, and we're hearing all his vibrations. So that's when we redesigned the 2 microphone mount to have 2 of our A55M rubber-filled donuts on there that the microphones fit into, and that basically reduced it. If you take those microphones out and look at them, they kind of look like Mickey Mouse ears, and so we started referring to it as the Mickey Mouse mount. It wasn't denigrating the president; it's just that's what it looked like. So the shock-mounted 2 microversion started out with George W. Bush, and here's Mr. Obama, and he's in the rain here, and there it still is the shock-mounted 2 mic version, but also with the big windscreens on it. Those windscreens are actually for the Shure SM81 microphone. They're the A81WS windscreens, but you put those on a dynamic microphone and you can be in wind of 40, 50 miles an hour and you hear nothing. So they really, really work well for high wind conditions, and of course also help keep the microphone dry.
Nice.
And then the current president, here he is not being there. He's absent in this photo. This is from the Helsinki thing, and he has a long, long gooseneck with one Shure SM57 in it, and there's a shock mount that hangs down. No one likes this except for the president. And when he's no longer in office, they will go back to the 2 mount mic. As a matter of fact, when you see Pence out talking, he will have the 2 mic mount as well. So this gooseneck 1 microphone setup was basically determined by Trump, because as we know, he knows everything. And so consequently, that's his setup.
Right. Yeah. So does he made that decision?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he made that decision. White House Communications Agency, again, they're a military organization. He's the commander-in-chief.
Absolutely.
They go along with it. Anyway, so let's get to this point about why does it remain the microphone of choice for the president? What is it? So let's start out with this statement from the White House Communications Agency. The POTUS, by the way, POTUS means for President of the United States. The POTUS microphone will be used in a variety of environmental situations, and failure in any situation is unacceptable. It'll be used indoors and outdoors, very cold to very hot temperatures, very dry to very humid humidity, no wind to high wind, and also there's physical abuse from packing and shipping. That's the basic fundamental aspect of this that the microphone has to withstand. So the unanimous recommendation is that dynamic microphone be used when absolute reliability is demanded. Yeah. Condenser microphones are great. Shure makes them. Robert makes them. They're valuable tools, but they're more reliable in controlled, benign environments. When condenser microphones, when you're in uncontrolled environments with rain and high humidity and so forth, probably not the best choice. And that's not because we don't know how to make them. There's fundamental physical aspects of condenser microphones that are problematic when there's high humidity and high temperatures.
Yes.
So mean time between failure is a key component. It's probably easier to understand if we take the word mean out and call it average time between failures. That's really what means. So a condenser microphone, no matter what the brand is inherently less reliable because it contains so many darn components. There's a preamp board in there. There's little resistors. There's capacitors.
Yep.
I looked at our SM81 microphone once and counted up the components, and that's a very reliable condenser microphone. I think there's 150, 180 parts in there, where the 57 has fewer than 50 parts. So basically, the fewer parts, then the less likely it is to fail. Absolutely. So that's what's called mean time between failure. We've actually done calculations on the mean time between failure parts of an SM57. This is interesting. Brian, let's do this before I go to the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you guess, or Robert guess, or your listeners guess, what do you think the mean time between failures is? In other words, you buy an SM57 now, and what's the average time it takes for it to fail? I want just be, shout out, send,
I, I'm gonna
25 years.
okay. Robert says 25 years. Okay, yep. Aaron,
I'm gonna venture to say.
you can't say it forever.
Okay, yeah, no, okay. I'm gonna say about 75 years.
Okay. Anybody else? Did anybody send anything else or text? Any chat answers?
No one has said anything.
All right, then I'll just show you. Oh, sorry, it's the next one. This just actually shows you the diagram of an SM57 and how few parts are in there. There's an element, there's a transformer, there's an output, there's a handle. There's not much inside the thing. But the mean time between failures is 58.2 years. So 510,000 hours. So since 1965, Waka has never experienced an SM57 failure. Now, they have over 400 of them currently. They get misplaced, they get stolen, they get crushed, and so forth, but they've never had a failure. So as you can see, it's 58.2 years. They've had them 55 years, so maybe I better retire in 3 years. because one's just about due. But that's pretty amazing to have a mean time between failure measured in
that's insane.
Almost 6 decades.
I was close.
You were very close. I'm impressed.
Close.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, I didn't think that you could damage the mic.
Oh yeah, you can.
I mean, man, they done been in water. A lot has happened, and they still work.
So let's talk about high temperature and high humidity. So the combination of these two conditions can cause a condenser mic, anybody's condenser mic, to hiss or pop or crackle. It can also cause changes in the sound of the condenser with frequency response shifts or changes in the transient response, or sometimes even complete failure. And these things are likely to happen, particularly when the humidity levels are above 95% and temperatures are above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That may not be what the president speaks in, but these conditions certainly can happen during shipping and storage. You imagine in the bottom of a C5 transport, and it's up in the air and it comes down, it's like minus 35 degrees, and all of a sudden they're in Washington, D.C., it's 100 degrees on the tarmac. Yes. This can cause condensation to happen, and condenser microphones do not like condensation. Wind noise. On average, the condenser microphone weighs probably 1/1000th, and maybe even less than the mass of a dynamic microphone coil assembly. Therefore, a condenser microphone just is more easily moved by wind, and you take them outside, and then all things being equal, a condenser microphone will produce more wind noise. It's not because it's a bad thing, it's just because the diaphragm is lighter. Okay. So if you have that, you're going to have a fairly large windscreen to cut down the wind noise with the condenser outside. And also the lightweight diaphragm of a condenser microphone also makes it far more susceptible to pea popping. Plosives are what they're called.
Yeah.
Phantom power. You got to have phantom power to power a condenser microphone. Nothing wrong with phantom power, but someone could switch off the phantom power accidentally on a mixer and then the audio would fail. More likely problem, you might have bad cables or dirty connectors, and when you have DC voltage flowing in the cable, it just creates noise. So a dynamic microphone doesn't require phantom power, and therefore you can't cut it off accidentally, and you can't have DC issues with power flowing and creating noise. And there's also long-term performances. As Robert, I'm sure, would tell you, performance characteristics of condenser mics can change substantially over time. That's why sometimes the vintage mics sound different or better.
Yes.
And a new condenser mic can sound very much different than an older one. But, it's with Waka having 400 microphones, how are they going to go and pick out, let's see, I need 2 condenser mics here. They both have to be from 1976. Doesn't happen. Yeah. And so consequently, dynamic microphones tend to stay pretty much stable and age. They pretty much sound the same. You can take a 57 from today and a 57 from 20 years ago, and they sound about the same. So here's additional reasons that the Waka likes the 57. The matte finish on the microphone doesn't reflect television lights or photographic flash. The dark gray finish typically blends well with the POTUS lectern and the dark clothing worn by the president in general. There's no on-off switch, so the POTUS or the staff can't shut it off accidentally. The A2WS, the smaller windscreen, is a locking windscreen, so once it's set, they can use a set screw, it can't be pulled off. And the larger windscreen, the A81WS, can be added for high wind conditions. So you can see all those things add up to, it's just the right microphone. And by the way, It sounds pretty good as well. So it's been 55 years since its introduction. It still is a primary microphone of the president. By the way, they buy them. Shure does not give them those microphones ever. And though, and we give them special service. For example, if they send some back for repair or replacement, we handle it very quickly, but it's always paid for. So, it's been an interesting organization, interesting relationship between Shure and the White House. I did it for 25 years. I was happy to give it up when it was time to give it up. And I'll just kind of close it out with a little tagline we like to use. That since 1925, Shure products have delivered the sounds and history of culture to the world. And, it's almost impossible to see a historic photo from the 20th century and not see a Shure microphone somewhere there. So that's my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Hey, so Michael, so this 57, man. I don't know what studio or even anybody recording or live does not have
at least
an
SM57.
Right? You got to have. That's like, if you don't have that, you're not really serious. I think
for the snare drum or for the guitar amp or
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What now you said there's the locking windscreen.
Yeah.
What can you explain a little bit further?
Yeah, it's called A2WS. It's just a small foam windscreen, and it has a metal collar on it that has a set screw. And so it allows you to place it on the microphone at the proper distance and then lock it down. So a lot of people make the mistake of they'll take a windscreen and they'll actually push it all the way against the grill. That's the wrong thing. You don't want to do that. You want to have the foam and then an airspace and then the grill. So it allows you to actually put it on the microphone and then lock it down so it cannot be moved. So that's what that's for.
Yeah. So, and it's so funny to hear how a lot of the decisions that are made in audio is based on visual.
Oh yeah.
That hurts my feelings a little bit, but I guess I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. We always people hear with their eyes far too much.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a buddy of mine was mixing one day, and I come in. I said, "What you doing?" He says, "Hey, yeah, I'm mixing." I'm like, "It's totally quiet. All I hear is a mouse clicking." I said, "Well, really? Like, how's that happening?" He said, "Well, I'm just looking at the waves." I said,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard. So now I know earlier we were talking about multiple products that you guys currently have, but that's not always been the case. Y'all have had other types of products too that probably has, y'all transducers. We said that earlier, right?
Yep.
So what were some of the other products that you guys started out with?
Oh, well, we did our first wireless microphone in 1953.
Really?
With vacuum tubes inside of it. Little miniature vacuum tubes for the transmitters. We made stethoscope microphones for listening to the heartbeat at one time. We made microphones used by the CIA to bug the Russians during the Cold War. Yeah, that was interesting. But it's always primarily though been microphones and of course photograph cartridges. We did phonograph cartridges from 1937 to 2018. And at one time, when I started at Shure in 1976, phonograph cartridges were probably 60% of our business, I would guess. And then you talk about technology putting companies out of business sometime. Yes. We were almost put out of business in the early 1980s because none of the executives at the time foresaw something called the compact disc.
Really?
Yeah. And that nearly killed us. But can I offer one quick story just for you? We could talk about that.
Please do.
And because this is a personal story, just give you an idea. So this is 1979. How old am I now? I'm 24. I'm 27 years old.
Yeah.
27 years old. And we have a headboard microphone called an SM10. And we're trying to sell this to communications for like TV studios for the cameramen, behind the scenes.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to a Doobie Brothers concert and I look and I got my binoculars and I look and I see the drummer wearing an SM10 and using it as a headset for a singing drummer. And I go, I go, my God, what a brilliant idea. I mean, it all came to me, right? There's no mic stand in the way. He can turn his head wherever he wants. The microphone tracks his breath. What a fabulous idea. So I come back, I'm all excited on a Monday, and I write a memo to my boss and saying, we need to advertise this as a singing, drumming microphone. By the way, in 1979, nobody was wearing headset microphones for performance. Nobody, right?
Right.
And so I'm really excited. And I send this out, and I get a response in red pen written all over my memo. This is the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. But as my wife will tell you, I'm a stubborn Norwegian. And I said, no, this is a good idea, and I would not let it go. And I just badgered them and badgered them and badgered. And about 9 months later, they decided to run one ad, and it was a drummer wearing this microphone, and the headline was, "The microphone should not stand in the way of your music." Right? Within 1 year, the sales of that microphone went up by a factor of 10. All sold to musicians. So what I'd like to say is that I did not invent the head-worn microphone, but I saw a good idea, and basically,
that's fascinating. That's awesome.
So head-worn microphones now used by musicians basically started with that SM10, which we did not design for that purpose at all. But the sound guy or sound engineer for the Doobie Brothers said, "Wow, that's a great idea," and look at, and now everybody does it. You don't give it a second thought. But 1979, nobody was doing it. So that's my one claim to fame, I guess.
But do you guys bring in creatives to even help with furthering ideas, like flushing out ideas like that?
Yeah, we have a small group of touring sound people that we bring in on a regular basis and stay very close with, and we get great ideas from them on a regular basis. But a lot of stuff is just created in time. But tell you, Byron, we could do a whole we could do a whole session sometime about products that Shure brought out for one thing, and then the world said, no, it's really for this. and then we look like geniuses where we were just lucky.
Well, look, hey, that's the American way.
Yeah. So SM10 was one example of that.
Man, well, hey, look, hey, thanks again, Michael. Robert, let me get over because I wanted to get into the inside.
Yeah,
I want to get the inside track. Of the tube mic. Why is it called the tube mic? Like, what is this thing? Like, we hear about it. I don't even think people even know what makes a tube mic a tube mic. I think a lot of people, are clueless in that area.
The main thing is that the amplifier of the microphone uses a vacuum tube. That's the easiest description.
And it is a condenser, correct?
Mm-hmm. Condenser mics can be tube, they can be FET condenser, electrostatic. So mine that I make and repair are mostly the old vintage style tube amplifiers.
The RMS 269. Ooh. I have to say, Mr. Sestili, that was one of my faves. Sorry, but it is. It's very difficult for me because I need a pair of mic. I don't buy one mic. I have to buy a pair of them. Because you never know. And it's not really for redundancy. It's more so for the stereo effect situation for me. But what I'm curious to know is, but let me get off of what I want to know because I'm sorry, y'all. This is personal. This is all this information is just right here. I'm curious. Let's get it going. I'm curious to know about the tube mic.
Yeah, let me I got some content I can share here.
Yeah.
All right, 1 second here. It's asking me for a password.
Absolutely.
All righty.
Yeah, I was sharing my screen earlier today, and we were in a meeting, and I put everybody on hold for like 10 minutes, like a whole 10 minutes. And, in today's time, 10 minutes is, like an hour and a half, you know. And I just felt so bad. I was just like, oh, God. Because I had to go into the security and all that kind of good stuff. But, I digress.
Yeah, Macs can be a problem sometimes.
Sure.
Mine's giving me a little issue here.
Yeah, it's wanting you to, it's protecting you from us.
It is trying to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't you give me a second here when
Okay.
we
Yeah.
can do some Q&A.
Absolutely.
Let me
I'll
figure this out.
I'll come back if you want to talk some more, Byron. My Robert's.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. So. 1903. When did Mr. Shore pass away?
1995.
Was he still like? What was he in the company? Like,
He was the sole owner, and when he died in 1995, he passed the company on to his wife, Mrs. Shore, who was let's see, how many years younger than she was? She was like 16 years younger than she was, and we thought she was just going to like maybe sell the company and so forth, but she ran it for the next 20 years.
Are you serious?
Yeah, until 2016, and I will tell you, he did a great job, and she did even a better job. We would not nearly be as big as we are now if it hadn't been for Mrs. Shore. So we've had, in 95 years, we've had 4 presidents. Mr. Shore was the first.
Yeah.
And then a guy named Jim Cogan was in 1981, and then Sandy Lamantia, and now our current president is Christine Chevink. So our president is a woman, which is unusual in the audio technology area.
We had a webinar a couple weeks back with.
There we go. Robert's got going now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, no, I was going to say about blind women in audio, and it's just not enough women in the audio game.
Just blind or sighted. No
exactly.
What. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Yeah. All right, so I'll mute myself and let Robert take over.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Michael. Yeah, sorry about that. Here I had to fix the setting on my Mac, but yeah. So tube mic's dismantled. So I thought I'd kind of start with a nice photo of an old German mic here, completely dismantled. So this is the guts of it. This is basically tubes mic. An easy way to differentiate a tube mic between another mic is tube mics always have a power supply. So tube mics can't really work off phantom power. Although there are some adjustments you can do to make that possible, but for the most part, they require their own dedicated power supply. So you have power coming in from the wall, AC power, that needs to be converted to at least a single rail of DC voltage. So it goes through a transformer or two, and then it gets converted into voltages that the vacuum tube can use. So a couple of things I'm going to talk about. Like I said before, I'm going to go through a quick intro myself in RMS, and then go through a quick history of tube microphones specifically, and then go into kind of showing everyone the fundamentals and components of how do you when you take apart a tube mic, what do you see? What's in there? What makes a tube mic work? Right? It's a lot different than another microphone. So it's very unique in that regard. So a little bit about me and RMS Audio Works. We started the company officially in 2010, so a decade now. We've been in business. Nice. Started out making one microphone. Now we have roughly 7. There's 4 models, and then the RMS 12 and the RMS 47 and 49 each have what I call the light editions, which is we kind of defer from the vintage style, which is a point-to-point wiring, and then we converted those into printed circuit boards, PCBs as they're called. So that tends to make things a little cheaper. Sound doesn't affect the sound quality by any means. It just makes it a little easier to produce and a lot faster and a lot more cost-effective to take that circuit. And rather than wiring it with individual wires, you put it on a PCB, and makes it a little bit easier to make. And then of course we have the RMS 269. And each of these mics are modeled after a vintage, Neumann's and or AKG.
Yeah.
So the RMS 12 modeled after an AKG C12. The RMS 47 obviously modeled after a Neumann U47. As is the RMS 49 and RMS 269. Those are both modeled after the Neumann M49, M249 version B and M269 version B. And we also, 50% of our business is also in repair and restoration of vintage mics. So we do cosmetic repair as well as full electronic repair of vintage Neumann, AKG, Schoeps, Gefell, and Telefunken mics. So brief history on tube condensers. So Michael, I love your presentation. Know that Shure actually had a tube mic. That's very, very interesting. But going all the way back to 1915 was the development of the vacuum tube amplifier. Not necessarily for tube mics. The vacuum tube amplifier was used in a lot of things, radios, televisions, obviously microphones, even the first computers had vacuum tubes inside of them. And then if you guys can visualize a vacuum tube, what really that is nothing more than a small light bulb. They come in a couple different versions. I'm going to kind of explain what those are, but that's really nothing more than that. 1916, a year later, was the first condenser microphone. So a guy named E.C. Wendt, he patented the condenser microphone while he was working at Bell Laboratories. So he was using vacuum tubes to enhance audio in telephones. And so kind of stumbled on this, on the vacuum tube and how well it works in an audio amplifier. And that's how the tube mic or the tube condenser mic was discovered per se. So about a decade later, company in Germany called George Neumann and Company was founded in 1928. And it's still in business today. Now it's Neumann Sennheiser. And they were really kind of took the tube mic and made it what it is today. Really made a mark in history there. And then throughout the 30s and all the way through the 1960s was really the broadcast era. That's when we saw these mics and just about everything. We saw them in TV studios, radio studios, obviously recording studios, right? And that's kind of the golden age of broadcast. You don't see these obviously anymore in TV or radio, right? They use more modern style mics that you have a lot longer service life than tube mics do, or condensers mic. They're a lot easier to use, obviously less susceptible to the noise, wind, all that sort of stuff. However, in the music industry, it's a little bit different, right? So the music industry started out, at least in the United States, they were using the older style mics than even the tube mics, a lot of ribbon mics you would see. And then in the late 40s, guys like Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, and of course the Beatles, they famously used these microphones in recording studios. So that's really when the audio industry really took to vintage tube condensers. Obviously they weren't vintage, they were cutting edge at that point.
Right.
And the big difference between using an older ribbon and then plugging in a tube condenser and singing into that was, Italians called it bellissimo canto, or beautiful singing, and that allowed guys like Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, crooners, you can say, to easily sing into a mic without having to project their voice. And that really not only just changed the industry, but that changed songwriting for forever, right? That was a huge mark in history. And so still today, you go into a recording studio, and usually a tube microphone is the number one choice for a vocal and even sometimes instrument recording. So it's still to this day, right? Back from 1928 all the way up to now. So 100 years or more, tube mics have been in production. So a couple different variations two mics. A lot of people just think of vintage two mic as this gigantic thing that sits on top of a mic stand, and they usually are, but they do come in small packages too. So these small diaphragm tube mics are out there. Um, Neumann KM254s, AKG C60s. Those are the smaller diaphragm tube condensers, and they're really smaller for a reason, right? They're usually made for spot recording, instrument recording, inside a piano as a stereo pair. So a lot of different reasons that make them smaller. And then we have the ability in some of those smaller tube condensers to change the heads. And what I mean to change the heads is to change the capsule that sits on top of that. So you can essentially change a small diaphragm condenser into a large diaphragm condenser simply by unscrewing the capsule and screwing a new one back on. And that really changes the sound of the microphone because the amplifiers in most cases are very similar. So if you were to open up one of these small tube condenser mics and you were to open up a large diaphragm tube condenser mic like an AKG C12, and the circuit design is oddly similar. So really it's that capsule that really makes the biggest difference between the two.
Interesting.
So what are the components, right? You open up a tube mic, what are you going to find inside? Obviously, the first thing you're going to see if you open it up is a tube, right? We're going to see different types of vacuum tubes. However, at the very top, you're going to have a capsule which has a diaphragm on it. A lot of different variations in capsules. And I'm going to kind of explain what's inside those capsules. What, if you were to open them up, what would be there? And there's essentially, if you guys can visualize or think of like a 50-cent piece, maybe two of those together, that would be and something like that's made out of brass and has a lot of holes drilled in it. And those holes are called the drill patterns. And then you essentially have a diaphragm that's either glued or screwed onto the top of it, which is made out of a very, very thin material, sometimes plastic, sometimes other materials, and then it's sputtered with either gold or nickel. And it's anywhere from 3 micron to 6 micron, so it's super, super thin. And those are glued on top of the diaphragm. And then when the air passes through, which is what we call sound energy, the diaphragm goes back and forth, very, very thin, and it turns that sound energy into electrical energy. And that electrical energy, we then amplify with tube or a FET device, and then convert that into what we hear. What we hear is audio. So these things are very sensitive, right? They are fragile. A lot of my customers have dropped their microphones as to why they're customers of mine, because they have to send them to my shop for repair. And then also other things inside a tube microphone, you're going to have an output transformer. And this is really what takes the high impedance circuit inside a microphone and changes that to a low impedance circuit, which then you can send down a 50-foot mic cable or a 20-foot mic cable. You might have heard of high impedance microphones in the past, or low impedance, but low impedance is somewhere around 200 ohm to maybe even around 500 ohm, or as low as 50 would be considered low impedance microphones. And that allows you to send a clean signal down a long mic cable into your mixer, into your microphone preamplifier, whatever you guys are using. Other things that you'll have with a tube mic are going to be accessories, right? You're going to see a pop screen. And I'm going to talk about why we use pop screens and the different meshes of a head basket, and all of those things definitely impair the sound. They all have an impact on what you hear. Shock mounts we're going to use, or sometimes stand mounts. As the tube microphones or any condenser microphones are very, very fragile, they're also very, very sensitive. So you're going to, if you touch it or you drop it or you hit it, obviously they're very, very sensitive to sound. So shock mounts are very important. A lot of the vintage style shock mounts are, sometimes they call them a cage, and they're basically a holster that's suspended by some rubber bands. So if you were to bump into one of these mics that's on, it's just really going to bounce around rather than make a a loud noise in the speakers or a loud noise in the user's headphones.
So not a good idea for the George Bush banging on the podium.
He would not do well with one of these, I suspect.
With a tube mic. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, wind wouldn't be good either. Even though
Right.
most of the vintage tube condensers have a multi-layer mesh head basket. They're very susceptible to wind, right, or pop noises from breath if you're up close to the microphone talking or singing. So pop screens are very, very essential if you're doing any recording or radio broadcasting, TV broadcasting with one of these types of mics. So design basics of a mic. This is probably the more technical side of my presentation. It really gets into the schematics and the old style design of my microphones. So I'm going to hopefully explain this in layman's terms so we can all understand it. So please interrupt if you guys have any questions. So as I explained before, you have a sound energy, whether that's speech or music or whatever you guys are doing and using these microphones. You have that sound energy going through a head basket, right? That's the first thing that impacts the sound. Is sound starts essentially at the head basket of a microphone. So they could be single layer head baskets, they can be dual layers. I've seen triple layer head baskets. So these are nothing more than a metal screen of certain density glued on a ring. And what that does is protects the capsule, right, from damage. We don't want to damage the capsule, but it also protects the capsule from interference, RF frequency, right? So if you live close to a radio station or TV station or even cell phones, right, they all have RF and they all cause interference. So we want to make sure that we protect the capsule from RF. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of noise into one of these. If you ever to turn one on and take the head basket off, you're going to get a big loud buzzing sound in your headphones. So that's the other reason for that. So going back to how we convert this sound energy, from whether that's speech or singing or music, right? We're converting that into electrical energy somehow. So sound goes through the head basket and hits what we call a microphone diaphragm. And again, this diaphragm is glued onto a brass, what we call like a brass ring, essentially, about the size of a 50-cent piece. It has a lot of different holes or drill patterns drilled right through it. And what that does is allows a sound to be formed, right? You can't have just one hole. You have to have a specific drill pattern in the microphones in order to get the correct frequency response. So you want to make sure your frequencies are going from 20 hertz, usually up to about 20K or 20 kilohertz. So you get the full audio frequency.
And a drill pattern has a lot to do with that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, these are, I mean, you can change the response of a capsule, not just by the diaphragm that sits on top that moves back and forth, but also by the drill pattern. So if you want to make a capsule brighter, you might have a different drill pattern, or you want to make it darker, you might have a different drill pattern. So very, very important. A lot of patents out there for that.
Yep.
And that's, these are, the capsule has to have some sort of voltage to it, right? So it's not just, a diaphragm's not going to just convert energy alone. You have to have some sort of voltage that goes to the capsule to power it. That way, when the diaphragm moves back and forth very slow, you're going to be able to convert that energy into electrical energy. So if you can understand what a diaphragm is that sits on top of the back plate, is what we call the back plate there. The diaphragm is going to be anywhere from about 3 micron to 6 micron thick. Okay, so think, if you don't know what a micron is, human hair is anywhere from 50 to 120 microns, depending on who you are. So imagine 3 microns, right? That's very, very, very thin. So that's why those microphones are very, very sensitive. So when air goes back and forth through that, it picks it up in a very accurate response. and it's super high impedance, right? It's nothing that we can send down a cable. It has to be very, very short of a distance between the capsule into what we call the grid of the tube. If it were longer than a foot, we would lose the signal, and that's how high that impedance is. So it has to be about maybe an inch or two of a cable from the capsule down to the grid before you start losing signal. And that's done all inside the mic, right? That's a very short run. And then the tube essentially, the vacuum tube, which feels like a little light bulb, little tiny light bulb inside the microphone. It actually does light up. So if you were to see this, you would see a little red glow inside the tube. And that's, again, powered by the power supply. So what that does is takes a signal from the capsule into what we call the tube grid. Think of the tube grid as the input to the amplifier. And we have a heater at the bottom, and that's what the main voltage of the mic goes into, and it heats up those electrons, right? That's what we call vacuum tubes. Sometimes they're called electron tubes. So it heats up those electrons. You got the audio signal coming into the grid, and there's something called a cathode inside the tube, which is kind of like a valve, right? It allows how many electrons to go, and where it's open or close, how many electrons you're allowing to pass through. And from the bottom of that tube, it goes up to something called the plate. And the plate is at the very, very top. And think of the plate, in most cases, the plate is the output, right? And that's, so the cathode is going to open up, heat up those electrons from the heater, pass your audio signal up through the plate and into the transformer. And then the transformer will convert it from that high impedance to a low impedance and shoot it right down that mic cable into the power supply, which then sends it off to your computer, your mixer, whatever you guys are using to amplify your signal. So that's really, in a nutshell, how a tube mic works. Obviously, there's a lot of different variations of these. There's things called the cathode follower circuits, which sends mic out or sends signal out the cathode instead of the plate. And there's different ways to bias a tube, which is really just kind of tuning it, making small adjustments to how that tube functions. But essentially, most vintage style microphones are what we call plate loaded, or which is the typical tube mic.
So the capsule, no, the basket, the head basket. How does that affect the sound? Like if the holes are bigger, or if they're smaller, if they're shaped diamond, or I don't know, how does that augment the sound? In what way? Like
it's kind
if
of
I
like,
wanted it to be more highs or something.
Well, think of it, if you were to talk through a screen, like a screen that's on a window, and you put a bunch of those screens together, that's going to affect your voice, right? The more layers you add to it, the more it's going to affect the signal that goes through it. So if you were ever to feel the head basket of an AKG C12, you would see, or you would feel that that's a single layer head basket. I mean, there's only one thick layer of mesh there, and what that does is that doesn't impact, or impacts very slightly the sound that goes through that. That's why a C12 is more of an open sounding mic. A lot of high end to it. And if you were to feel a head basket of a U67 mic or U87, that's a triple layer head basket, right? So it's going to feel a lot thicker, and it's going to affect the sound, right? Then and one more thing too, not just the thickness of the head basket, but the size of the head basket too, right? So the larger head basket is going to affect the sound as well. So a microphone like the M49, the Neumann M49, which is used a lot for miking like orchestral or stereo miking a room, that has less of an effect of a long range sound to it just by the size of the head basket. So that's why that microphone works very well in that application.
So, I mean, the microphone is I think just as fascinating, because all of this, transformation of energy into into electricity all the way, but it does the same thing coming out the speaker, right? And what's fascinating to me is that it's like conversion in the even though it's a different, it's different. I mean, you're converting the analog signal into a, something that the computer can see and actually regurgitate, but it does it like instantly. As soon as you're talking to it, you hear it out the speaker. That's so crazy. That's the process. Like, and it is all of this conversion just happening from from a person just singing or just a sound that just happens, and and it's just fascinating. So I want to this drill pattern is is it the more holes you get there? I am such a lame at this, but I'm calling them holes because I don't know what it's technically called.
That's exactly what they are. Yeah.
Is the more holes, does that make it like susceptible to the higher frequencies, or what? Like, how does that what's the science on that?
Well, from what I see, from what I understand, it's not about more about it's more about the size of those holes, right? Going through there, obviously there's a lot of different small holes, pinholes at some point. I'm not a capsule maker, so the best I can answer it is I would say it's more about the size of those holes than about just exactly where they are on the plate themselves. And capsule, we can, some of these guys that I buy my capsules from, they can talk, a whole day about how to make a capsule, because there's a lot of different variations of a capsule. Right? That's the most simplest way I could put it. There's single backplate, dual backplate, multi-chambered capsules like the AKG CK12, probably the most complex capsule out there. It actually has 4 plates kind of smashed into one. So you have drill patterns on each side, but then the inner plates have their own drill patterns. So it's very, very complicated.
I guess it depends on how much of the surface, you how much pressure you're putting on the surface of the diaphragm there. I guess
Right.
I guess
It
that
all
would play a
responds
part.
to the sound energy or sound volume. Essentially, the louder you get, the closer you are to the microphone, the more sound pressure that hits that capsule, which then forces it to move back and forth at a distance from the diaphragm to the backplate. So that the louder the signal, the more that
Yes,
diaphragm is going to wave back and forth.
which is a lot of times why a lot of mics sound stressed when you get up there. As far as
Oh yeah,
higher
you could
pressure.
easily clip. Oh yeah, you could easily clip one of these mics for sure.
Yeah, I've had a young lady come in and I asked a buddy of mine, but I looked at the signal, and the signal was at -9. But it sounded like it clipped,
Hmm.
and I was like, and I'm using a tube a tube mic at that time,
Hmm.
and it it didn't sound like digital. It didn't sound digital clipping, but it also did not sound like when you hit tape hard either. It didn't have that kind of pleasant thing. It was not pleasant. Um, but let me ask you this, because in I mean, condensers before in the analog world and condensers now. I mean, not condensers, but tubes to be more specific. In the analog world as opposed to in the digital world, are you tuning these tube mics any differently because they are in the digital domain 99% of the time?
Not really. No, I wouldn't say so. Most digital medium these days, the new stuff from Avid,
Yeah.
there's a lot of headroom. Back, I would say a decade ago, even more, when you had the older converters, there's, like the old original M box or something like that, or, the older, competitors to Avid. A lot of those, where you were working in like a, 16-bit format, you ran into a headroom problem at some point, right? But these
Sure.
days, working at 32-bit floating, you got more than headroom than you'll ever use, I think.
Yeah. 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 Like.
I was going to mention one thing just for your listeners, and that is that a lot of people think that you can actually see the movement of a mic diaphragm, and actually, it is usually measured in millionths of an inch or 100,000ths of an inch. So it's not moving anything like a speaker cone.
Oh no. No, you're talking microns,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Right. So a 1 micron is 0.001 millimeters. So you can imagine how tiny that. I mean, it's insane. You never be able to see that.
Yeah. I know I can't see it at all. So, right.
Or feel it.
Right.
There's no vibration or anything like that you can feel going through there. No, it's a micro universe up there in those mics.
Fascinating.
So we don't currently have any questions. We have some comments. Dominic Stansberry said, I have the Shure MV5 USB mic right here. And then Leroy Abraham said he just picked up a Warm Audio WA47 tube condenser.
WA47.
And
okay.
I lied because Scott Chesworth, you are live.
Mr. Chesworth.
Evening, chaps. How are we doing?
All the way from across the pond. How you doing?
Yeah, the Queen says hi.
With the head talk.
I'm not here in an official ambassador capacity, but I've got a feeling she's still not over it. So, I've been recording for quite a long time, but I'm pretty stupid about like how things work. As long as it works, I don't tend to think about it too much. And this thing of like being able to swap out capsules is totally news to me. So I wanted to know how much standardization is there? Like, is switching out the capsules a thing that's pretty exclusive to RMS, or is it something you can do with any tube mic from?
No, I wouldn't say it. None of my mics that I make are have the swappable capsules per se. I think when I was talking about the small diaphragm condensers is when I was talking about that.
Oh, right. Okay.
So usually the AKG models, a lot of those are interchangeable. So you can buy like a CK4 head, or you could buy, CK1 or CK2, and each of those has a different response. One's omni, one's cardioid, figure 8. When you get into the Neumann world, most of those are interchangeable. Not every one of them, but most of them are. And then there's been even some modern companies like Blue. If you guys have ever heard of Blue microphones,
yeah, sure.
They took the same threading as Neumann used, so their capsules are swappable with Neumann and Gefell mics as well. But I wouldn't say it's a rule, but it's usually the case.
I just never knew it was a thing at all. And how sensitive are capsules? Like, is there any sort of recommendations for like storing them when you're not using them and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Mike was explaining this a little bit. So condenser capsules are they're very susceptible to heat, humidity, even dehumidification, right? So a lot of the older capsules made in the 50s and 60s have since dried out, especially the older ones that were made of PVC versus the new ones. So I would say on average a condenser capsule from Neumann AKG, I'd give it about 25-30 years as to when it needs to be reskinned. So reskinning means you're gonna pull the diaphragm off of the back plate. Usually you're gonna put a newly skinned diaphragm and reattach it, either center terminated or edge terminated to the capsule.
Okay, got
so
it.
capsules themselves, the back plates are made out of brass, and once those are clean, they last essentially forever. But it's really the diaphragm, that really thin 3 micron diaphragm that tends to dry out. or if a lot of people are up close on the microphone and you get a lot of spit on it, that damages it after a while. Or smoking, obviously, cigarette smoke can damage it. So about 25, 30 years, and that's about it you're gonna get out of it.
Yeah, I accidentally a couple of weeks back blew a big cloud of vapor into a trash. Like with the mic live, it didn't sound good, man. I don't
Oh
know.
no,
It
I don't
still
like that.
works, but I'm fairly sure I must have done some damage. It sounded like I did some damage.
Yeah.
I was listening to Mike talking about moving coils,
Hmm?
and again, really newbie question considering how long I've been doing this stuff for. But is that the same principle of how guitar pickups work, or have I made that up?
No, it's similar. Guitar pickups, of course, you basically have a stationary coil of wire, a stationary magnet, and then you've got a magnetic string that basically disturbs the magnetic field, essentially.
Oh,
Uh,
so that's the thing people are talking about when they go on about how many winds are on a
yeah.
coil, right? Okay.
For example, if you put like nylon strings on your Telecaster, you're not going to hear anything.
Yeah, sure.
You know,
Ooh.
but you are right in one thing, and that is that there is a magnetic field, and the coil of wire. In this case, the coil of wire on a moving coil microphone basically cuts through the magnetic field, and you get an output from that. So it's similar. It's related. Let's say that's the best way to think. It's related.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, chaps. This
You're
was
welcome.
super helpful.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Well,
Nice one.
Mike is a jazz guitarist too.
I am.
Ah,
Yeah.
Wow, that was a question that came. That was pretty insightful.
good stuff. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Scott, for that question. So let me back on the tube, Mike. When firing it up at the top of a session, turning on everything, is there a particular order in which things should come on? With the supply, power supply, and the gear, and in the control room, and all that kind of good stuff.
Well, I usually recommend about 15 minutes prior to the session, prior to use, that you let them warm up, and that really, you know, it's not going to really change the sound a whole lot. Um, usually within the first, 30, 40 seconds of power on is really when you're going to hear the biggest difference. Um, that should be sufficient. That's really just so those electrons start to get heated up inside the vacuum tube, and the tube gets a little bit, gets a little warm. After you can leave them on for days, it's really not going to hurt anything, and the tube will get hot. If you touch it, if you open up the mic and touch the tube, it will feel hot like a light bulb, right? It's not going to burn your hand per se, but
Sure.
like you remember the old incandescent light bulb, not the LEDs now, but the older style halogen bulb.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
they
Yeah,
get hot, right? I mean,
yeah.
there's different, different heating element in those, but essentially that's the same thing. But yeah, there's only one on-off switch on the tube mic. It's not too much else you got to worry about other than the polarity pattern. Um, that could be either on the mic itself or on the power supply, depending on the
Possible.
model.
So if you have like a mic engage button in that channel, should that be on first, or is there does it matter?
In
This
most
would be more
cases,
at the preamp level. I'm saying.
in most cases, no. A tube mic's it's not gonna go from 0 to 60, right? It's gonna have a slower warm up period. So if you were to engage like your input on your mixer and then flip on your tube mic, you're not gonna hear anything right away. You usually won't hear a pop or anything, even if the channel is on. And then slowly you'll hear the kind of sound get louder and louder until it gets to full level.
Yeah. Yeah. Man.
But when you shut them off, that's a different story, right? When you typically if you shut off a tube mic that's been on, you'll hear a pop or something like that. So it's always good to keep your speaker volume down when you're disengaging them.
Basic maintenance for a tube mic, is there any?
Keep it in a good location, not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, not too dry. Really, that's about it. Usually, condenser mics are stored in some sort of wooden case with padded wooden case, so it's usually sufficient.
Hey, Michael. Sure. I don't know when this was, but the 313 that you guys got, the ribbon mic.
The ribbon mic, yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of history on that? Because
Sure.
I don't they weren't making, were they manufacturing that at first, or
Well, we made our first ribbon microphone. Quick story on that, and I'll tell you about the Crowley and Tripp mic.
yeah.
So for many years, here's the historian sure thinking that our first ribbon microphone came out in 1952, a Model 300, and that was pretty much the story that I always said and talked about. So it was about 2 years ago, I was going through the archive and I noticed that we were missing a Model 50 from 1939. Now, typically with Shure, if a model starts with 5, it means it's a dynamic microphone. It's not always the case, but it's kind of how we label things. So I didn't have a Model 50, and I put the word out amongst my small group of vintage mic collectors. If anybody had one that they wanted to sell, I'd like to get it for the archive. Well, my friend Tom Ellis down in Dallas said, I've got 2. You've done me so many favors in my, over the years. I'm going to send you a Model 50 in great condition for your archive. Cool. So I get it back, and I'm expecting it to be a dynamic microphone, like a Unidyne. So what do? The first thing I do, I take it apart, and it's a damn ribbon microphone from 1939. And I did my best Homer Simpson imitation. I stood and stared at it for about 3 weeks. I kept saying, it's a ribbon. It's a ribbon. And it turned out that we started making ribbon microphones in 1939, not 1952 like I thought. So all of a sudden I had to go back and rewrite all my stuff that when our first ribbon microphones came out. So we did ribbon mics from 39 up to around mid 80s, when the ribbon market had just gotten so small from us that we just didn't want to make them anymore. So we got out of the ribbon microphone business.
Yeah.
Then in the 2000s, or maybe like the late 90s, a company called Crowley and Tripp started making sort of ribbon microphones. And what was unique about them is they came up with this material, which they called Roswellite, after Roswell, New Mexico, which was a ribbon material that you could almost not destroy. Now, typical ribbon microphones, I'm sure Robert will know this as well, have usually very thin corrugated aluminum ribbons that if you blow on them or look at them the wrong way, they tear or they stretch or whatever.
Yep.
So this Roswellite material had been created by a sister company of Crowley and Tripp for use as a medical transducer, and it was really, really rugged. And so this interested us. And eventually, Crowley and Tripp said, the microphone business for us is just a sideline. Sure, would you be interested in buying it? So we bought Crowley and Tripp. And basically what we bought their designs and technology. And so the microphones we now make, the KSM 313 and the other, and then 353, our most expensive mic ever that we made, are based on the Crowley and Tripp designs. They now, sure, we have the patents or own the patents for the Roswellite. But there's something. It's a good thing you brought out, Byron. It's an interesting thing. For example, Robert's microphones, RMS microphones. People get that they know they have to take care of them a certain way and treat them a certain way, and AKG C12s and U847s and so forth. Yeah. People don't treat Shure microphones nicely in general.
Oh, they do. They just don't. They just don't treat them like their favorite child, right?
They see our name on it and they go, "Oh, I can treat that like a 57, no matter what it is." And this is a curse as well as a great advantage to us. So whenever we decide to bring out a new product, we have to try to figure out people are going to treat this like a 57. So we didn't want to get back into the ribbon microphone business, knowing that people were going to abuse it, because ribbon microphones in general are fairly fragile. So when this technology came about, this Roswellite, where you could put it in front of a kick drum and it wouldn't stretch the microphone, it stretched the ribbon, we said, now we can make a ribbon microphone that you can drop and treat like any other Shure microphone. So that's why we did it. It wasn't that we wanted to be back into the ribbon microphone business. Ribbon microphone business is very tweaky. If you sell 100 microphones a year, that's a ribbon. That's a huge amount.
Jesus.
But we could, with the Crowley and Tripp, offer that high-end ribbon microphones for the recording people and for live sound as well. But also have it be that you could not bust it, and that's something that we deal with. It's our curse to do this. That it says Shure on it, they're going to treat it like it's a 58. And whether they should or not. So it's the reason that we would probably never do a vacuum tube condenser microphone. That's a small market for one, everything, but people would get one and treat it like a 58. It would break, and then they'd be ticked off.
Well, then they'd have to call Robert.
Yeah, well, I know, but
I should create one.
that's the difference. It's what the
For
brand
sure.
means.
For
Brand
sure.
means reliability and durability, not something you have to baby. So we have to be careful.
So what is the quality control like at Shore?
Oh my God,
mics?
you can't. It's like one of the largest departments. It's the only department that can shut down shipping at any time. If quality's unhappy with stuff, they can shut down shipping. And it goes back to World War II. From 1942 to 1945, we built microphones and headphones and earphones for the military. And when you build things for the military, you build them to military spec. And, if a microphone fails on a plane, you might lose the plane and you might lose all the people in it and so forth. So it's a whole different level. And Mr. Scher figured out when we started building the military spec that, yeah, it costs you a lot more money up front regarding quality and so forth. But on the tail end of it, you had fewer products go back and you started to build up this reliability. So when the war ended, Mr. Scher said, I'm going to build consumer products to military specifications. We still do that today.
Yeah.
I mean, if you came and you see the quality testing in Niles, you would just be blown away. By we have something, for example, we can simulate a microphone being up 100,000 feet in the air. Because we look at, well, I mean, when NASA came to us and said, we want to put your microphones on the space station, we said, will a dynamic microphone work in with no gravity? We had no way to simulate it. Turns out it does, works just fine. But we try to do everything we can to break it before the customer breaks it. And so, yeah, there's when you buy an SM57 or an SM58, a lot of the cost of that is quality.
Isn't it fascinating? I think it's remarkable that we, as consumers, I think that the 57 is the number one microphone that you can find multiple of just laying around in a case full of like it's a and it is a tool. But I mean, Jesus Jones, I mean, it's not a pair of pliers. You don't just throw it in the tool. You put it away, stow it properly, and but I find I can go into an audio guy's case and just find them just laying around, like multiple of them, and pull it out. I know it's going to work. That's the funny part about it. But then you got
for 58.2 years, it's going to work.
But then you got the White House, and then you got NASA. Using the same thing, and I think that is a contrast.
Well, I mean, Robert's. I assume that RMS, besides relating to RMS, is probably also your initials. Is that correct, Robert?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So you've put your name on the product, and that probably means something to you, and you want that product to be good. So think about Mr. Scher. He didn't call it American Microphones or Universal Microphones. He called it Shure. It's his family name, and he was very adamant that anything that we made or sold had to equal his pride in his family. So
man, just meant to be. Just meant to be. So Robert, this is probably not even a microphone question, but being an entrepreneur, jumping into your own business, as a product manufacturer, as a guy who is working in repairs in this industry, what's some of the challenges that you've been met with in starting this particular tube mic business?
To be honest with you, the biggest challenges I have are sourcing, right? Sourcing material. That's when you're building, tube condenser mics, you're not making them in a factory where where you're producing thousands a year.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near that. So getting the reliable, good materials in low quantity has been the biggest challenge since the beginning. A lot of people don't want to talk to you unless your minimum order quantity is 1,000, right? And that's how many mics I'd sell in years it would take me to do that. So then you're kind of sitting on all that. So there's the business challenge of doing that. What's the cost benefit? How long are you gonna have these parts laying around, or you want to pay a premium for a lower quantity. So that kind of supply chain stuff has always been the toughest, honestly.
It makes sense.
Yeah. This brings up something I wrote down before. I just want to tell your audience something, because Robert mentioned EC Went and his work with Bell Labs, and I don't know if this book is available in Braille or online or something, but there's a book called The Idea Factory, and it's about the history of Bell Laboratories, and it's one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, because Bell Labs did things like they invented the decibel. They basically, a guy named Claude Shannon working at Bell Labs wrote the first book about digital theory. Basically, Claude Shannon in 1939 wrote a paper working at Bell Labs that said, all data could be a 0 or a 1. I mean, the things that Bell Labs did is just everywhere in our lives, and a lot of people don't know about it. And for me, if that book's available, accessible to your audience, The Idea Factory, get it, because you will be blown away with what Bell Labs did. And it's really a shame that Bell Labs no longer exists.
Yeah, what happened to the company?
It became Lucent Technologies, and went through all kinds of different changes. It was in Murray Hill, New Jersey for years, and just all these geniuses worked there, for lack of a better term. It's just astonishing. The more I've learned about Bell Labs, the more amazed I am. As a matter of fact, I was so thrilled the other day. I bought a used book from 1970 it was a history of the microphone that was written in like the late 1800s. Fascinating book.
Really?
Yep. Fascinating book. It really shows you what was going on at the beginning. And, it basically exposes Edison to be the crook he was.
Exactly. Yeah. We were talking about that a little bit.
But the most exciting thing was when I opened up the cover, it was a book from the Bell Labs library. and I screamed, and my wife says, "What's wrong?" Microphones, each of them costing all of $70, and they acted as acoustical triggers. And when the acoustical SPL level hit a certain amount, when it took off, the output level of the microphones would trip these relays, and these relays would open up vacuum bottles that would suck in the exhaust gases, and when they came down, they would analyze it.
Holy cow.
So so one of them failed, and time something failed on the space shuttle, NASA had to do a failure analysis. So one day I get this box back, and it says on the outside, NASA specialized space product. I can't remember. It was a cool thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I open it up, and there's this letter. This is an SM-11 that failed on this shuttle flight. Can you find out what the problem was? Yeah. So we do an analysis. The problem was they routed the cable wrong. They broke the microphone wires inside the mic cable. The microphone itself, the transducer, worked perfectly well. So I wrote up a long letter, sent it back to them. NASA contacts me, I don't know, a couple of weeks later. It says, "What do we owe you for this analysis?" And I said, "If you let me keep the mic, it's free." So we have a Shure SM-11 that was on the Space Shuttle Atlantis 35 times in space in our archive.
Wow. I got to come and take the tour. That's just what it is.
Whenever I can get back into the building.
I know, right? Yeah. No doubt.
Can I join you for that tour?
Most definitely, brother. How you feeling, man?
I'm doing all right. Can't complain. So I got a question for Robert, because I'm pretty familiar with dynamics and stuff like that, for pretty much all the reasons that were discussed. And working in untreated home studio spaces, they're kind of been my microphone of choice. But I'm a little bit more interested in the tube microphones, and what's the difference between like a fat bass versus a tube bass microphone, if you can explain that a little bit. And a second question is, do you do mods at all, or is it just repair and restoration?
Good question.
So I'll answer the last one first. So yes, yes we do. It depends on the mic, right? If it's a import of a China variation that was bought for $100 at a Guitar Center. We'll do the mod, of course, but it might not be worth the time and effort, monetarily speaking. So I guess it all depends, right? It depends on the mic. Usually, any vintage mic, will usually take that, regardless of the value of it. But a lot of modern mics, some, they're still in manufacturing, right? So you would, a lot of times I would say go to the manufacturer for repair, but modification obviously a little different. But short answer is yes, right? As far as the ladder on the difference between a FET and a tube, in our case we use tubes as the amplifier. Modern mics use FETs, FET transmitters as the amplifier. They impart a different sound. Some people feel that the FETs sound cleaner, right? They're going to have more of a cleaner low mid, maybe useful for certain voices or certain instruments. Where the tube going to give it maybe a more pillowy sound on the high end, softer sound you can say.
like that.
So some tubes give you a richer sound in the mid range too. Surprisingly, the small sub-miniature tubes that a lot of people use these days because they made so many of them and they're so cheap to buy in quantity, those have a really rich tone in my opinion. I use them in my 49 and my 269 because I can get those in low quantities that are still very cost effective for me. So if you were to look at the frequency response of a microphone, most of the time it's going to be a linear circuit, right? Certain exceptions to that, like the U67, but in most cases it's a linear circuit. So you're going to get for the most part, clean signal from 20 to 20K, depending on where the bump is on the capsule. The bump would usually be somewhere around 5K or sometimes 10K to give it a little brightness or a little edge. But it really comes down to the end user, and what they hear or what they're looking for in sound. But the main difference is, one's amplified by a tiny little FET device or a group of FET devices inside a mic or a vacuum tube. And the FETs typically just work off phantom power, right? It's easier to use. You plug them into your mixer, hit the phantom power, and you're good to go. Tube mic usually requires a dedicated power supply. So more maintenance, right? More headaches, but trade-offs are, some people prefer the sound. So it's all up to the end user.
Gotcha. Yeah. One last question. You mentioned the tube that you're using in your microphone, and you mentioned that they're based on various vintage circuits. Are you going for kind of a point-for-point clone, or this is a modern version with the characteristics of these vintage mics?
We try and stay true to the original schematic. But when you do change the tube, obviously you have to change the circuit a little bit to compensate for that, whether that's in the biasing of the tube, or the plate resistor or something like that. Or I'm just using that as an example. Or the transformer turns ratio is going to depend on how much the tube plate is loaded. So tiny things we try not to change as much. We try and keep it historically correct as possible, but there always are slight changes for the tube.
So you try to get it close to the vintage sound with modern equipment.
Yeah, the exception there is like the C12, and that tube and transformer are readily available, so that is true to the original design. So that's kind of like the exception there.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Yeah, Thank you so much for your time, guys.
For a fraction of the price.
I think anything's a fraction of the price of a C12.
Yeah. Right, yeah, like a house.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Steve.
All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So, Byron, I actually have a question for Mike.
Yep.
So, can you tell me the main difference between, because I play music on the side as well. What's the difference between the Beta 57 and Beta 58 and the SM 57, SM 58?
Okay, so difference between let's do two things. Beta SF57, SF58 difference is the ball grill. That's it. Okay. Beta 57, Beta 58 difference is the ball grill. That's it. No matter what you read anywhere else, because that is it. Now, you're talking about the head shell. What did you call it? Not the head shell. What was the term? The first part?
Head basket.
Head basket. So you put a grill, a spherical grill around the element. It's going to sound different than a conical grill. That's the difference. Look at. Now, let's look at the difference between an SF58 and a Beta 58. Let's look at that. Beta 58 is a supercardioid. SM58 is a cardioid. Beta 58 has a neodymium magnet in it. The SM58 has an alnico magnet in it. So the Beta 58's got about a 4 dB more output level, approximately. The Beta 58 has an undentable grill, where the SM58 grill is very dentable by design. That's like a crumple zone on a car. So when you drop it, it crumples to take the impact. And then the Beta 58 has a better internal vibrational shock mount than the SM58. That's it. So people say, "Oh, I should buy it." Beta, isn't that better? No, I says it's just different. But I will tell you a story. I love this story. So when we were going to bring out the Beta, what drove us to do the Beta 58 was Electro Voice started selling some microphones with neodymium magnets in it, and they started to have some sales experience, or sales success, because people would take the neodymium mic and compare it to our alnico micro, and it would be louder. Oh, louder is better. Well, we all know louder is not necessarily better; it's just louder. Anyway, so we figured out, well, we better have a new series of microphones with the neodymium. So we start working on this. So we had this outside designer come up, and he basically brought in his version of the Beta 58, the way it was going to look. It had a gray handle on it. It had a bright chrome grill and orange polka dots around the equator of the grill. I kid you not. And those of us who were musicians and so forth, and we looked at it, we said, we're going to be laughed out of the industry if we do this. And the president of the company at the time said, "We paid for this design. This guy's a professional designer. He knows what we're doing. This is what we're going to go with." And we begged and we pleaded and said, "Can we at least show it to a few sound engineers before we bring this thing out?" So we had 10 of them made up or whatever, and we took them out, and they just laughed us out of the place. It's the stupidest looking thing I've ever seen. We have examples in the archive, which I never bring out, by the way. And the Beta blue color that now used actually came from, I was a product manager at the time for our Shure circuitry line. And we used to use this kind of really lovely blue stripe across the front of all of our mixers. So we took that blue stripe and put it around the band of the Beta 58. That's why that blue band's around there. That was based on the mixer. And then we just found a color on the handle that basically complemented that. And that's where the Beta blue came from.
So, who makes those decisions? Is that marketing, or is it a team effort, or is it just, like you say, you just come with an idea and they kind of like implement it?
Marketing's supposed to, but then of course they always run it up the flagpole, and then you get executives in there who sometimes know what they're doing. The smart executive says, "I'm not an expert in this, let it go." But then it turned out that the president at the time, who was a great guy, just he was an engineer with it, and he just couldn't keep his hands out of it. The funny thing about this is that he was colorblind. So he couldn't see how ugly these orange polka dots were. Oh God, man, I gotta tell you, the stories just go on because it's a great company, but it's filled with people, and people are always goofy.
Yeah. That's the cool part. That's the cool part.
But that's the basic difference between a Beta 58 and an SM58. Higher output level, supercardioid pattern, undentable windscreen, and then a slightly better shock mount. But if you don't, I mean, we still sell far more SM58s than we do Beta 58s.
Really?
Oh yeah. I was just writing a story. I do a weekly internal thing called Tech Tips, and it's written for internal people. And I just did something about the Rolling Stones when they did their 2016 concert in Havana. I don't know if you guys remember that, but right? Free concert, huge big deal, right?
Exactly.
So here's the Rolling Stones, the most famous rock and roll group in the world. They can afford anything they want. All of their vocal microphones on stage are either wired SM58s or wireless SM58s.
Hey,
From
man.
Mick all the way down to everybody else. It says something. They can afford anything. This is what I like, you know. So, you know, Robert's microphones, they cost a lot because these are hand built. I get that, man, and trying to get the parts and so forth. But you know, you can't necessarily say that price equals quality. With a microphone, it's like a musical instrument. If you happen to,
That's right. That's right, Michael.
If you buy a $500 Telecaster, you know, imported one or like that, and you like it and you sound great with it, wonderful. You know,
Yeah.
So don't think that there's anything wrong with an SM58 because you can buy it for $100. So it's good enough for Mick Jagger. It's good enough for Roger Daltrey.
U2, yeah, U2 uses them, right?
You too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Bono. Yeah, he definitely
Yep, exactly.
He records with it, as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At least
I
that's
mean,
what I heard.
it
And I heard
works.
James Hetfield uses the SM7.
Well, and the famous Michael Jackson Thriller album, that was an SM7.
SM7. Yeah.
And Mick Jagger also. A lot of times when Jagger's in the studio, they'll use a U47 on him and an SM7, and then they listen back to both of them and see which recording fits better in the mix. You know, so it's a tool. Use the right tool. Don't worry about how much the tool costs.
I try to tell people that all the time. They say, "What's the best mic?" I said, "The one that works."
Right. The one that equals your artistic vision. That's the right mic.
Absolutely. Like we got any questions?
Scott Chesworth asks in the Q&A, question for Robert: any plans to roll out a polka dot model? Where do I start? Scott, you should have just said it. I don't have your voice.
I know you should let it, because
No, I'll include some nail polish so you can make your own. You even pick the color.
You know, I just want to say another thing. Robert, thank you. I learned a lot from your presentation. I really
thank you.
I really enjoyed it. That was great with the history stuff, and you know, there's always more to learn. And when I meet someone like you who's really into it, I know that there's stuff I'm going to pick up. I'll probably be contacting you later for other questions too.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah, man, that's a good thing.
Thank you very much.
Where we at on time? Like it?
We're at 3 minutes to the hour.
Oh, really? Already?
Yeah.
This is insane. I'm about to cry.
Beautiful information. That's why.
Yes, Michael, Robert, man, thank you once again. This is I mean, I keep blaming other people, but I you know, it was really me that really wanted this webinar to happen.
I see.
So I can say it at the end now that it has happened.
You buy your sister a catcher's mitt for Christmas, right?
Absolutely. Hey, look, anything we're promoting, anything, Robert, especially on your side, I know, because I mean, hey, you're an entrepreneur. You got services, you got products.
Yeah, check out the website, rmsaudioworks.com. Check out our mics, and yeah, that's about it. And thanks for attending. And Byron, I'll give you the slide deck, and you can keep that in your archives or forward that out to everybody.
Sure. Man, the 269. I'm just telling you, RMS 269. It's the way to go. Michael.
Yes.
Anything closing?
Well, I think
remarks?
Most of the people probably know. Sure. I just like to let them know that we are. This is a thing that's not known a lot about our company. So when Mrs. Sure passed away, she basically left the company to a trust, and the trust is held by the employees. But the beneficiary of the trust are charities. So we are a for-profit company that's run for the benefit of charity. And not many people know that, but that's how Mr. and Mrs. Sure ran their life. These were people that could have had 5 houses and Lamborghinis and so forth, and they didn't. They lived in a modest co-op apartment, and they had an Oldsmobile. And the vast majority of their wealth they gave away, and they wanted that to happen when they were gone. And so that's how they set it up, and that's how we continue to run. So I'm not trying to do that as brave, but it's a wonderful place, and I love going to work every day. And so know that if you buy our stuff, we hope you buy our stuff because you like what it does and it's durable and reliable. But also know that a portion of whatever you buy eventually ends up going to charity.
Socially responsible. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Socially responsible starting back in the 30s. That's what's really
exactly when it wasn't cool, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, that's a proven thing. I mean, Robert kind of alluded to this earlier. Gentleman who's rest his soul, hooked me up with Davida Rockman over there, and Sure has been sponsoring us. Whenever I call, it's how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? That's just fascinating. I'm like, man, these folks really like what they do. You can really tell.
Yeah.
In the culture when things are right inside,
Yeah, but it's there's so many companies that say, oh yeah, we're socially responsible, but Mr. and Mrs. Sure they lived it their entire lives, and it continues on now, and they set it up like that. That's
amazing.
So, it's cool.
Amazing. Hey, thank you, everybody, for attending. Once again, I don't know what we're doing next week. I do know what we're doing next week. Actually, it just came to my brain. It's gonna be fun. But stick around. Let me see. I guess I can say it. We're gonna have 4 vocalists. We were supposed to really do that webinar, right? Like tomorrow. We're gonna do webinars back to back, but I don't think people wanted to see my face, 2 days in a row. So I had to give them a break. And in that break, the young ladies were gracious enough to let me push back a week. And so we're going to have some lady soul singers on. They also use Shure products. And if you're singing out in the club, you probably don't have a choice.
Well, yeah, almost.
Yeah. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Aliki. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Robert. And be safe, man. This is a wild time. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
There is.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.